Welcome back to ITFM Insights, the show where we dive into the strategies, tools, and stories shaping the future of IT financial management. I'm your host, Kiara Zapanta, and today we're talking about something that's top of mind for every IT finance leader, IT productivity, and how to measure what actually matters. Joining us today is Tim Pietro, Vice President of Business Development at Rigo Consulting. Tim brings a powerhouse background of helping clients across industries implement ITFM and TBM. Tim, thanks for being here today. Could you start by telling us just a little bit about your background?
Sure, and great to be here. Thanks for the invite. So, yeah, you're right, Tim Pietro, that is true. I am with Rigo, been with Rigo for about a little bit over 2 years, but pretty much spent my whole background at a small company in the Bay Area called Cisco Systems. 18 years, I did 2 stints. And the story that I tell CIOs every week is in 2007, John Chambers, who was our CEO, came to Rebecca Jacoby, who was our brand new CIO. And he asked her 2 questions, the same 2 questions that a lot of CIOs are challenged with today. What he said was, hey, Rebecca, I'm writing you a check for $1.6 billion. What are you doing with it? What value are you bringing to Cisco? And we couldn't answer those questions. We could talk about technologies and routers and switches and applications, but we didn't have a way to communicate the value. So we went on what we call the service transformation. We were actually Apptio's 3rd customer. So that was a journey in itself. And then I ended up going to VMware, went to ServiceNow, actually went back to Cisco. That's where I got into consulting. And then here I am now talking with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Looking forward to our chat today. So now jumping into our topic, when you're working with clients, how do you really define IT productivity in a way that actually resonates with them?
It's like the 2 E's that we've lived with for like 25 years in IT. You know, how can you be efficient and effective? And it's a balancing act. And the balancing act that we've always had is, operational excellence versus, costs. And you have to find the right balance. So I think today, when you look at whether it's you're managing a project, you're doing a service, product technologies, it's all about resource and how do we manage those resources. So time is critical. And I think time and kind of how we manage not only the people piece of it, but also the hardware, the software, et cetera. So effective, efficient, those are kind of the 2 big E's. We've been using that for 25 plus years. It still plays out today. When I think about, productivity, I think about metrics. And so in the ITFM world, we're always focused around cost. But when you look at the bigger picture, like a framework like technology business management, what we're trying to do with that framework is value goes beyond just cost, because you could have a service where the cost is very low, but the user experience stinks. So what we always recommend at Rigo is to really pull in what I call the 6 core metrics. And what's unique about these metrics is today, every IT organization, you're doing these metrics today, but they're probably at an application layer. All we're doing now is we're taking that data and we're going to roll it up to what we call service offering, which is a flavor of a service. And we take the same data, we're going to roll up to a services view, category, and type. So the 6 metrics are, obviously cost, but quality, number of incidents against an application. Now we're looking at number of incidents against an offering. User experience, speed is a big one. We're living in this agile world, or time to capability. Leverage and reuse is huge. In fact, you don't even have to have a fully built out cost model to really start to look at those metrics initially. When you start to map your applications or offerings, you'll start to look at, wow, why do I have 3 different conferencing offerings? Maybe I just need 2, maybe I just need 1. And then hopefully everybody out there, you're doing risk metrics. And again, what we're doing is we're applying the TBM framework, which we're really applying a services-centric view for how we operate. And so these metrics are really, really important. But the other thing we do at Rigo is we help customers implement what we call service review. And these are usually in addition to your typical quarterly business review. But usually the CIO will choose the top 10 or 15 services, and they usually happen once a quarter. Some might do it monthly. But what they do is they'll bring in the service teams along with the leadership staff, and they'll start to go through those metrics. Maybe initially the financial management metrics. You hopefully using the dashboard of Apptio, not exporting to PowerPoint and uploading to another tool. But what's great about the service reviews is there's this mindset change over time where we go from being very reactive with the metrics to being proactive with the metrics. And that's the ultimate goal of financial management and TBM and FinOps. How can we get out in front of the business? How can we be that strategic partner? So when we talk about productivity, this is it right here. This is where we're going to showcase within IT. And then hopefully over time, not the first year, but once we get comfortable with our metrics, then we start to bring the business into those service reviews. So CIOs have told me over and over again, they get more value out of their service reviews than their quarterly business review because we're truly measuring the health of IT. And again, it's beyond just cost.
That's awesome. I really like your framing around, efficiency and effectiveness. Those two E's really capture really the heart of this conversation. But of course, achieving them is easier said than done. And speaking of that, I'm sure you've seen your fair share of organizations hit roadblocks. So why do you think measuring IT productivity is still pretty challenging for most teams?
Yeah, it goes down to one word: accountability. Too many organizations, when they bring on a tool like Apptio, they just assume that the engineer or the admin or the TBMA, the hands on the keyboard, that they're going to go in there and find the cost savings, that they're going to create these awesome dashboards and all by themselves, it's going to create all these metrics and we're going to start saving money. And that's not the case. The number one pitfall that I have seen doing this for 16 years, and again, if there's one slide I could pass out at the door at the TBM conference, it would be this slide, is it's really implementing what we call service roles. These are the individuals that are accountable to go out there and get those metrics. They're the ones that are accountable to go out there and find whether it's cost savings, cost optimization, go clean up the data. But too many organizations, they don't implement service roles, or if they do it way too long in the pipeline. As you build out your cost model, your service owner, if you will, the general manager of your service, should be part of that discussion on how you want to allocate those dollars. So service roles is a huge pitfall. And a lot of customers, they'll have service roles, but then when I go talk to like a service owner or a technical architect, and I ask them, what's your day-to-day responsibilities? The answer is usually, I don't know. They just assigned me this role. So there's no accountability. There's no success metrics that are put in place. So that's where we start to pull in things at Rigo about, creating what we call a services life cycle. So we always recommend with CIOs and leaders, put some of those success metrics on people's performance reviews. And it might even be as easy as if you're a service owner, we expect you to reduce your run the business costs by 3 to 5% year over year. Now we're starting to get, some solid feedback. We're starting to get some solid metrics. We're starting to get people start to really, truly be what we call service owners. That's really important. That service life cycle is all about accountability. There's 5 phases to it. I'm not going to drill into everything, but what we always do, we have a Tiger team. We'll go line by line, and we'll create a RASCI. I have an S in there for support. But this is where we truly operationalize IT financial management, the TBM framework. We do the same thing with FinOps. But this is the most common pitfall. They either don't have service roles or they have roles, but people don't really know what's their day-to-day activities, what are they being measured on. It's not in concrete. And so this is where we make it real.
Awesome. Yeah, that's such an important point. Just having a TCO or just tracking TCO really isn't enough if you don't know what to do with it. So I love how you break it down into those 6 core metrics, especially because they give both IT and the business something to align around just beyond just cost. So that really brings me to the next layer of this. When it does come to cost, it's still critical to get it right. So when you're working with IT leaders or the like, what are the specific cost efficiency metrics that you recommend?
So it depends on the person you're speaking with. So I would say the most common pitfall that I have seen over 16 years is we get all these dashboards up, we get all these metrics. And again, there's a lot of reports in Apptio. But what we do is we kind of walk into someone's office, whether it's the CIO or the CFO or the VP of infrastructure, and we're so excited about all these metrics, and we show them something like this. Right? We have all these metrics all over the place. And it's a common pitfall. So what we tell our customers, and this is part of the journey, is depending on who you're speaking to, what metrics are key to them. So find out what are the top 4 or 6 metrics. So for example, I know at the end of the day, when I go talk to the CFO, he or she, they really care about 3 things in IT. They care about how are you going to increase the revenue, the profits, and my net income. When I go talk to the VP of Enterprise Architecture, at some point the discussion is going to be around, can we do costing at the business capabilities layer? So it really goes back to the personas. What do they really truly care about? A project manager is going to have a different set of metrics that they're going to be measured on that they care about versus an IT architect. So we talk about personas. One of the things that we have part of the TBM Council is we have various personas that we recommend. I won't go through all of these, but again, whether it's the CIO, it's the CFO of IT, which is a role that I've noticed that has been created most recently, business relationship manager, I can go on and on. But to help you with the personas is identify what are the key metrics, but even you can even go back and say, what are the key use cases? Because every single persona, they have specific use cases that they're trying to tackle, that they're responsible for. So long answer to your question, but it really comes down to the persona. So again, run the business metrics, change the business, number of units. One metric that, a lot of our customers are always focused around is incidents. What we've noticed is a lot of customers they'll see that their support costs is actually very, very high. But when you actually drill down into the actual incidents and the cases, about 40% of the incidents that are created today are not issues. They're actually complaints about the tool. It goes back to the user experience metric that I mentioned earlier. And people don't realize every time someone opens up a case at their company, on average, it's usually $12. Just that initial first incident that gets opened. But then over time, that support cost, that incident ticket increases over time. In fact, if you call into the call center, that initial price of that ticket is probably going to be more $15 to $16. But people don't think about that. But as a service owner, I start to think about, well, how can I decrease that support cost? I can go ahead and improve the UI, but maybe I need to add an FAQ. Maybe I need to add a knowledge base. There's things you can do, again, go as a service owner to reduce that cost without having to invest dollars. So again, it goes back to that services life cycle, roles and responsibilities. That's just one of many examples that I can share with you.
Perfect. Yeah, those are great points. So when it comes to labor, how do you coach IT teams to think about productivity in a way that's actually useful and sustainable?
Yeah, I would say, 10 years ago, the hot topic within IT was benchmarking. Today, there isn't a week that goes by that time tracking comes up, timesheets. And I actually did a survey about 2 years ago asking people that were part of the TBM Council, how many of you are doing timesheets? And it's amazing that more and more companies are actually moving away from time tracking against projects as we move into an agile world. But to be honest with you, I always found, this is going back to my time at Cisco, that it's critical to measure people's time, not against a project, but against a service. And so that kind of leads me to this point. There's kind of 2 ways that I view the relationship of projects and services. So this is kind of project management 101. Every time you create a project today, there should be a drop down of which service or services are going to benefit for that project. Easy peasy 101. And that's a great metric for the service review. Now we can start to look at a service like video conferencing, and we can see all the demand, all the projects against that service. But the better question to ask yourselves is those what we call the delivery service of the ADAM model. Is what services do we need in IT to deliver this project? So do we need a project manager? Do we need enterprise architecture support? Do we need a ticketing system? What's great about tracking those dollars against a project, and again, we're part of financial management to account for the total IT spend. It's amazing how many customers forget about those delivery services, even things like support and security. Those are even the TBM office is a cost, is a service. But that project management service thing is really, really important, because now if I'm the service owner for, let's say, QA, I can now go to my CIO and say, hey, I need more money. Well, why? Well, look at the demand against my service. So going back to time tracking, what I really encourage everyone to do is actually start to track people's time by a percent against a service. So if I'm supporting video conferencing and at the same time email, start to track why 40% of my time is going to be dedicated to video conferencing, the service, and the 60% is going to go against email. And you can start to track that. And maybe you change it maybe once a quarter. I highly doubt that somebody's effort is changing on a weekly basis against a service. But that information is really, really important. And again, I encourage people to do that, whether it's by percent. Obviously, we have Target Process, which does a phenomenal job of tracking labor, right, outside of timesheets. So there's a variety of ways you can go after it versus the old-fashioned way of just doing timesheets. But that's a very critical question. And a lot of companies, they actually kind of just take labor and they kind of put it on the side and say, that's just 20% of run the business. But you would be surprised that labor cost is critical for how we look at project financials.
Yeah, for sure. Labor is such a huge part of the whole IT spend. So I really like that take that you captured. And I think a lot of teams really do get stuck on trying to capture every detail when really in reality, I feel like a directional view, like percentage time by service, like you mentioned, can be just as powerful, especially when it informs decision making. And speaking of decisions, how do you help clients strike that balance between staying financially accountable and still delivering like meaningful business outcomes?
Yeah, so how we help our customers is we really talk about, and you've heard this in the industry for years, IT financial management, just like TBM and FinOps, it's a journey. It's crawl, walk, run. It's not a paint by numbers exercise. So what we've created at Rego is what we call it a journey map. And it's not about implementing a tool or tools. It's how do we operationalize the frameworks, whether it's, again, TBM, FinOps, et cetera. What's critical is upfront, right? There's 5 phases to the journey map, but the very first phase, leadership alignment, is critical. That's where we're going to define what's the vision and the strategy. Why are we adopting technology business management? What are some of the success indicators? How are we going to measure that we're successful? Not from a costing standpoint, but just overall from a people culture perspective. How are we going to measure ourselves? And this is an often area where people miss. They don't start to think about success indicators. They don't start to think about the culture until after they get into the operate or even in the optimize phase. So be able to have that journey map and be able to show that to your organization and say, here, we're going to go on a journey. Here's what month 1 looks like. And then here, year 2, year 1, year 2, year 3. And again, there's a lot of details behind the journey map, things around implementing your service portfolio, service roles, implementing services life cycle. I'm a big believer in early adoption. Then you start to get into implementing your TBM office. Then once you get to optimize phase, you start to look at, well, maybe there's a different way for how we budget. Maybe we don't budget by cost center. Maybe we budget by service category. Right? Maybe we say, here's $10 million for communication collaboration. I don't care if you do 1 project or 1,000 projects, that's your budget for that specific service category and all of the service and service offerings. But that journey map is really important because people have to know what is the end. The other piece of the journey map that will help everyone out there is make sure you show value early and often. Especially as you build out your cost model. Too many times we wait until the end to show people. As you build out your cost pools, pause, show the organization what you just did. Right? We took the IT financials, now we created the cost pools. Then as you build out the towers, which is going to be changed shortly with Atom 5.0, but as you start to build out the next layer, pause, show everybody. Last month we did cost pools. Now we're starting to allocate these out to what we call technical resources or the latter, IT towers. But again, a lot of recommendations behind that. I mean, I can answer that question all day, but what has worked for us really well is, just get people in a room and just start to track what are the success indicators, what are we trying to achieve. Do we want to go to the organization and say, yes, you are required to reduce your run the business by 3% year over year? So long answer, but I guess I could spend a whole day just answering that one question.
Yeah, and just to expand on that one, what kind of insights do you recommend to help IT leaders surface when they need to defend or even expand their budgets? You've sort of touched on this, but any specific metrics that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the service metrics that I shared earlier. I mean, the ones that really stand out for CIOs is really kind of the unit costs. We see a lot around direct and indirect costing. Shadow IT, there's always of interest around what percent of our budget are we spending on shadow IT. What I will say for those people that are thinking about going on this journey and listening to this podcast is one of the reasons why CIOs are adopting TBM and even FinOps and IT financial management is because their IT budget is not increasing year over year. So flat is the new up. So one of the benefits is there an opportunity for me to be able to reduce my run the business costs and hopefully reinvest that into change, grow, and transform AI, cybersecurity, multi-cloud, et cetera. So the key metrics for CIOs is really around those different levers that we have as part of the cost model: labor, hardware, software, outside facilities, looking at the run the business costs, or what we call keep the lights on. And is there a way? And again, going back to leverage and reuse. We recently had a customer, they had 52 different instances of Salesforce. Right? They didn't know that until we started to take that data and started to align it to the Atom hierarchy. And again, that was very early on the cost model. We didn't have to get to the show back, or I call shame back view or charge back of the model. That was as soon as we started to map cost pools to technical resource pools. That's where we started to kind of see some initial savings. So it's pretty amazing. But again, the metrics that I'm sharing here with you right now, these are all top of mind for CIOs. Again, goes back to the personas as well too. There's some people that will care about run the business costs. There's others that will not care about run the business costs or unit costing or incident costing, et cetera.
And you touched on AI. And so when looking ahead, how do you see IT productivity metrics evolving, especially as more orgs embrace AI, cloud, automation, and all the other market trends that are happening?
Yeah, without question, there's definitely a shift from output-based metrics to value-based. And again, I think I've mentioned value 100 times. And when we initially built the TBM framework, we created one slide with 4 value conversations. That's one of the very first slides ever created when we started to create the TBM framework. What we're noticing now is the shift is moving away from number of, for example, number of tickets closed or lines of code or hours worked. The shift now is really about business outcomes per IT investment, impact on innovation, cost savings from AI. And again, we're on the early stages, but that's obviously top of mind. That's what gets me excited about IBM and Apptio. Be able to see the power of AI within all the solutions. So yeah, measuring the number of security patches. So there's these again, it's more about value based than it is about the output later. And then automation is another key metric that keeps on coming up, where it's looking at the manual work reduction as a percentage. That comes up a lot. Customer experience, I talk about user experience as well too. Those metrics are coming up. So again, we're going beyond just cost metrics. We're starting to pull in value-based metrics. So again, I can't stress that enough. If you're not doing service reviews today, you should be. And I highly recommend that. And again, I highly recommend service roles in the life cycle, because it's accountability. We can talk about tools and ITFM and frameworks, but if you don't have people that actually own the service, you're just not going to get any value out of the framework or even out of the solution.
So that's a wrap on this episode of ITFM Insights. Huge thanks to Tim for sharing his real world perspective on how it takes to measure and improve IT productivity in a way that matters. So if you're just starting your ITFM journey or looking to evolve your metrics beyond cost, hopefully today's conversation gave you some inspiration and practical takeaways. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe and we'll be back soon with more stories and insights from the front lines of ITFM. Thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.